My name is Aaron Blake. I'm 40 years old, and I live in a small apartment overlooking the Chicago River, the kind of view that makes you think you've made it, even when you're barely holding it together. I work in private security, mostly boring corporate contracts, background checks, digital audits, the occasional surveillance job for paranoid CEOs. It's ironic, really. I make a living finding out other people's secrets. And I missed the biggest one living right in front of me. Her name was Julia. We met 5 years ago at a charity event for veterans. A friend dragged me there, said I needed human connection. She was behind the registration desk, smiling that polite, professional smile that doesn't mean anything until it does. When she asked for my name, I told her. When she said mine back, it sounded like a promise. Julia had this quiet energy, the kind that draws you in without effort. She worked in finance, sharp and ambitious, but with a softness that slipped through when she talked about her mother's garden or her love for old movies. I thought she was balance, the calm I'd been missing. We moved in together after a year. It felt natural. We shared mornings, plans, passwords, everything that meant trust. For 3 years, I believed I'd finally stepped out of the life I used to lead, one full of shadows and suspicion. I stopped checking phones. I stopped doubting. I let her in completely. And then, like most things worth breaking, it started quietly. Late meetings that became later. The faint smell of cigarettes. Though she didn't smoke, her laughter when she thought I wasn't home, soft, different. It wasn't paranoia. Not for me. I knew how to read signs, even when I didn't want to. So I waited. I didn't ask questions. I observed. Old habits never really die. It was a Thursday when the whisper became a scream. She said she was working late again. I offered to bring dinner to her office. She froze for half a second before smiling too quickly. That's sweet, Aaron, but don't bother. I'll grab something with the team. I kissed her goodbye. Watched her drive off. 10 minutes later, I followed. Her office was across town, the kind of glass and steel building that looked expensive enough to be honest. Her car wasn't there. Instead, it was parked outside the Parkline Hotel. I stayed in my car, engine off, lights dimmed. I waited. 30 minutes later, I saw her come out, laughing, head tilted back, armor on, someone I didn't recognize at first. Tall, gray suit, expensive watch, easy confidence. I'd seen that face before. Took me a second to remember where. His name was Victor Lane, CFO of her company, married, 3 kids. They kissed before getting into his car, not the nervous kind, the kind that says this has been happening for a while. That was the moment something inside me went absolutely silent. No shouting, no heartbreak. Just the slow, cold understanding that my life had become a story I'd told 100 clients, and I'd let it happen anyway. That night, I didn't confront her. I played my part. She came home late. Claimed she was exhausted, showered, crawled into bed. I lay there beside her, listening to her breathe, wondering how many lies she'd told with that same soft rhythm. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to document. I installed cameras, small, unnoticeable, ones I used for corporate work. I mirrored her phone data using a tool that wasn't exactly legal. Within a week, I had enough evidence to burn 2 careers to ash. But something in me wanted more than exposure. I wanted understanding. Why him? Why risk everything? And that's when I saw the message. It wasn't about romance. It wasn't even about love. It was about money. He has no idea about the transfers. She wrote, once the funds clear, I'll ghost him. You'll handle the rest. My name wasn't mentioned, but the context was enough. Julia wasn't just cheating. She was part of a financial scheme. One big enough to ruin lives, including mine. The woman I thought was my peace had used me as her camouflage. That night, I stared out at the city lights and realized something simple and terrible. I wasn't dealing with heartbreak. I was dealing with a criminal who shared my bed. And I was going to take her apart slowly, quietly, piece by piece. Not out of rage, out of precision. Because when someone like me gets betrayed, love doesn't die. It mutates into strategy. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just break you, it reprograms you. You stop reacting and you start calculating. Every gesture, every word, every movement becomes data. And I've always been good with data. After that night, I started treating Julia like a client, not the woman I loved, the subject of an investigation. I knew her routines, her passwords, her habits. She liked predictability. I used that against her. Her mornings always started the same. Coffee, phone, a 20-minute scroll through the news while sitting on the couch. That's when I sensed her device to a cloned environment, a digital mirror. Everything she saw, I saw. Texts, emails, calls, even the ones she thought she deleted. Within 3 days, I knew more about her secret life than Victor probably did. They met twice a week at hotels or his penthouse, always under different pretexts, meetings, strategy sessions, client follow-ups. It wasn't the physical betrayal that burned me anymore. It was the planning, the coordination, the efficiency of it. It was business. And in their business, I was an obstacle. I learned that the money transfers were part of something bigger, corporate embezzlement dressed up as financial adjustments. Victor moved funds through dummy vendors. Julia's job was to validate those transactions through her department, clean, simple, invisible, and tell me I'd signed off on a few of the same reports she'd helped me review. My name, my credentials, were the final approval stamps. If the system ever got audited, I'd be the one holding the bag. They weren't just sleeping together. They were framing me. It was surreal, living alongside her. Every morning, I'd make her breakfast. She'd smile, kiss my cheek, tell me I was the only one who understood her. Then she'd leave, thinking she was fooling me. I played along, perfecting the art of pretending. Smiling while watching her unravel in silence was its own kind of high. But I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was designing punishment. I started by leaking fragments of information, quietly, strategically. A misdirected email here, an anonymous tip there, the kind that doesn't destroy immediately, but corrodes trust over time. Within 2 weeks, Victor's name came up in an internal compliance audit. Nothing major yet, just whispers. But whispers grow fast in corporate hallways. Then I planted the first real seed. A single forged document, a transfer authorization bearing Victor's e-signature, subtly altered. The numbers matched his hidden accounts. It looked authentic enough to pass initial review. When the auditors found it, they'd see exactly what I wanted them to see. And they did. By week 3, Victor was under investigation. And Julia, she started to panic. The first cracks showed at dinner. She was distracted, tapping her phone under the table. When I asked if she was okay, she gave me that fake smile, the one I used to mistake for shyness. "Work's just stressful," she said. "Yeah," I answered, cutting into my steak. "I heard there's an internal audit happening. Something to do with discrepancies." She froze mid-bite, then smiled again, too quickly. "You and your security rumors." I looked up at her, met her eyes. Rumors usually start with truth. She didn't say anything after that. That night she left for a late meeting. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. My cameras did the work for me. I watched her meet Victor in his car, both of them agitated, voices rising. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught fragments, documents. Mistake, someone leaked. She was unraveling, and I was just getting started. By the end of the week, Victor's accounts were frozen, his company access revoked. Julia started getting calls late at night, unknown numbers. She'd step out of the room to answer, then come back pale. The stress started showing in her face, in the way she flinched when the phone rang. That was my first victory. But it wasn't enough. Because every time I looked at her pacing, lying, pretending, I remembered how she used to look at me with that same feigned warmth. And I wanted her to feel the same suffocating helplessness she'd gifted me. So I planted one more thing, an email thread between her and Victor that never existed. It painted her as the mastermind, the one manipulating the CFO, not the other way around. It was beautiful, clean, plausible, deadly. The next Monday, she came home shaken. "They suspended Victor," she said, voice trembling. "They think I—" She stopped mid-sentence, looked at me, and in that moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes, not guilt, not shame, but fear, not because she suspected me, because she didn't know what was coming. I walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said gently, "Everything's going to be fine. Julia, it always works out for the innocent." She nodded, trying to believe it, but I didn't say who the innocent were. That night, when she finally fell asleep, I sat by the window and watched the city lights ripple across the water. Somewhere out there, Victor Lane was realizing he'd lost control. And Julia was next. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was balance, and I was done pretending to be the victim. I used to think there was a clean line between revenge and justice, a moral edge you could balance on without falling. But lines blur fast when you're staring at the person who destroyed you and realizing you're becoming them. By the time Victor's name hit the company's internal bulletin, the chaos had spread like wildfire. Half the finance department was being questioned. Rumors about fraud, offshore accounts, bribery. Nobody knew what was true anymore. But that was the beauty of it. When truth becomes fog, people panic. Julia was unraveling in slow motion. She'd stopped sleeping through the night. She'd paced the apartment at 2 a.m., muttering under her breath, checking her phone every few seconds. Her confident stride, the one that used to command boardrooms, was gone. She looked small, and I loved it. Every flicker of fear, every sleepless night. But under that satisfaction, something else began to grow, something darker, because revenge isn't clean. It never ends where you think it will. One night, I caught her sitting on the floor of the bathroom, phone in hand, crying quietly. Not loud sobs, the kind of crying that comes when someone realizes their world's collapsing, and they can't fix it. I should have felt sorry for her. I didn't. She looked up at me, eyes red. "Aaron, I think someone's trying to destroy me." I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "What do you mean?" "Everything's falling apart. Victor's ignoring me. The audit team found something with my name on it, documents I never signed. And they think I'm—" She choked on the words, "the one who set him up." I crouched beside her, put a hand on her shoulder. "Julia," I said softly, "you've always been smart. Maybe you should talk to the compliance team. Clear your name." She stared at me, desperate, searching for some kind of comfort, or maybe for truth. But I gave her nothing, just a neutral, practiced expression, because the truth was, she was right. Someone was trying to destroy her. By the end of the month, the company suspended her pending investigation. Victor had vanished. His accounts, his office, even his social media gone. He'd fled, most likely trying to distance himself from the wreckage. Julia, left holding the mess, started spiraling. She called him one night. I watched it all from the mirrored device. "Victor, please. You promised me." He cut her off. "You got sloppy, Julia. You should have covered your tracks." Click, and call. I stared at the screen for a long time after that. There it was, the irony. The man she'd betrayed me with had just betrayed her. That should have been enough. It should have ended there. But I wasn't satisfied, because somewhere between collecting evidence and watching her fall, I'd realized something. I didn't just want her ruined. I wanted her to know who did it. It happened one rainy night, the kind of Chicago downpour that blurs everything into smudges of gray. She was sitting on the couch, motionless, staring at nothing. Empty takeout boxes on the table, unopened mail scattered everywhere. I walked in quietly and sat across from her. She didn't even look up. "You know," I started, my voice calm, "I've been thinking about trust." That got her attention. She blinked slowly, meeting my eyes. "Trust? Yeah? How easy it is to give it. How hard it is to earn it back once it's gone." Her face tightened. "Aaron, please. Not now." But I wasn't asking permission. I leaned forward. You lied to me, Julia, about everything, about the late nights, about him, about the money. You used me, and you thought I'd never find out. Her mouth fell open. You've been spying on me. I smiled faintly. Spying is such a harsh word. I'd prefer investigating. Her eyes widened as realization hit. It was you. You're the reason the company, Victor, I interrupted, standing up. Victor was never your partner. You were just leverage. And now you're the liability. She stood, voice shaking. You've destroyed my life. I took a step closer. No, Julia, you destroyed mine. I just returned the favor with precision. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. I could see her trembling, torn between rage and disbelief. I thought she might hit me. Instead, she just whispered, I loved you, Aaron. I really did. I laughed once, sharp, bitter. Then you should have chosen someone who didn't know how to dig graves without leaving fingerprints. She left that night, packed a bag, slammed the door, disappeared. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I'd already stripped her of everything that mattered, her career, her reputation, her pride. But as I watched the taillights vanish down the street, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory, emptiness. Because for the first time, I realized the silence she left behind wasn't peace. It was vacuum. And in that vacuum, my thoughts started to echo, questions I didn't want to answer. Had I gone too far? Had I become exactly what she'd made me? I poured a drink, sat in the dark, and for the first time since it all began, I didn't feel in control anymore, because revenge is clean in theory, until it starts bleeding back into you. They tell you revenge is satisfying in books. They leave out the part where the satisfaction peels away like old paint, and underneath is just more wall to sand. The work I did, the audits, the leaks, the timed evidence drops, it moved like clockwork at first. Then it began to move me. Julia vanished, and for a moment the city felt cleaner. My inbox quieted. The press cycle turned to other things. Victor was gone. My name didn't show up in headlines. I should have exhaled. Instead, something else arrived on my doorstep, consequences. The first consequence was small and bureaucratic, but it landed like a stone. One morning I found a formal letter from my company's legal counsel waiting on my desk, an inquiry into my outside activities and whether any of my security contracts posed a conflict of interest. Someone had noticed patterns, odd emails, timed anonymous tips, echoes that lead back. They didn't call me suspect in the criminal sense. They called me a risk. I answered every question with the practiced calm I'd used 100 times in witness rooms and client briefings. I told them I'd been concerned about irregularities and had notified appropriate channels. That was true, but it was only half the story. I omitted the parts about forged documents and honeypot Wi-Fi and email accounts I'd spun up. The truth is a luxury. You use it when it helps you, tuck it away when it does, and single quotes second, the collateral. People I hadn't intended to hurt started paying for my strategy. The junior analyst in finance who'd once looked at me like I was a mentor got reassigned. His career trajectory stalled because he'd signed a reconciliation report under pressure. Compliance couldn't risk him in a role that touched sensitive ledgers. He called me once, voice hollowed by embarrassment, and asked if I could put in a good word. I told him the plain truth. Keep your head down and do better. That answer tasted like ash. Then there were the whispers. Coworkers who'd once invited me to drinks now offered formal handshakes and awkward smiles. Clients who used to call me first began routing requests through legal departments. The security work I'd relied on felt suddenly precarious. The comfortable network of favors and small bets had shifted. The city's quiet judgment was worse than any headline. And worst of all, someone started watching me. At first, it was garbage, a car that lingered a few blocks away. A man at the coffee shop who always ordered the same thing and never left without glancing at me. I could have shrugged it off as paranoia, but then my phone buzzed with a photo. My building, the stairs leading up, the timestamp that synchronized with my own entry time the night before. No message, no signature, just proof. Someone was cataloging me the way I had cataloged Julia. I called a friend, a cop I'd known from a past contract. He listened and said, "Document it. Don't go looking for trouble." I laughed then, because looking had been my entire livelihood. But I slowed down. I started to sleep in short bursts, keeping the lights on. The city had teeth. They'd sharpened them on me. The interesting thing about being the architect of someone's ruin is how quickly you begin to interpret every neutral event as blame. A late-night knock becomes a threat. A misplaced file becomes sabotage. The human brain is a pattern-seeking engine, and I had trained mine to find only one pattern: betrayal. Then, 2 weeks after Julia left, a woman knocked on my door. She introduced herself without ceremony. Detective Leila Marquez, mid-40s, hair pulled tight, eyes that missed nothing. She said she was investigating a string of anonymous tips and possible tampering in financial audits at several firms. Nothing public yet, but the kind of inquiry that either dies quietly or becomes a problem. She asked if I'd talk. I told her the version of events that kept me safe. I'd been suspicious. I'd reported. I'd help as needed. I did not tell her about the honeypot, or the forged emails, or the thrill of watching their scaffolding creak. She took notes, polite, methodical. When she left, she didn't look at me like a victim or a villain. She looked at me like someone with hands that could get messy. That look sat in me longer than my guilt. It was a mirror. If she narrowed her focus, if evidence tied me to the origins of the leaks, the whole thing could flip. Victim becomes suspect. Hunter becomes hunted. I'd built a house of cards on the premise that only their lies would crumble. Reality, it turns out, has a way of reminding you that fire engulfs indiscriminately. Then came the email from Victor. It was short, sent from a burner that still worked. "You think you won. You have no idea what you broke." No signature, but his words were enough to shift my sleep into jagged intervals. He disappeared, but a man who loses in the public sphere often cultivates uglier paths in private. What worried me more than threats was how easy it had become to justify escalation. Once I'd permitted myself the small cruelties, the anonymous tip, the planted evidence outrages that would once have shocked me now felt like necessary tools. The moral calculus worked. The small person you hurt is an unfortunate side effect. The greater good is a thing that smells like compromise. I did what I could to recenter. I reached out to the junior analyst and tried to help with a reference. I left an envelope at the vendor's office with back pay and an apology note I didn't send. I tried to return favors quietly, to offset the ledger. That patchwork didn't stop the unease. And then Julia called. Her voice had the same undertow, as it always had: soft, steady, tired. She said she was safe in a city 3 hours away. She said she wanted nothing to do with me, with Victor, with the noise. But then she added something that surprised me. "They called me last week. People from places I don't know. They asked if I knew you. They said you pushed them." She paused, swallowed. "They said I owed them for my mistakes." Her words were a bead of mercury, quicksilver and dangerous. I asked who they were. She said she didn't know, just that names were murmured and threats implied. My gut went cold in a way the audit never had. This was no longer just corporate fallout. This was organized and patient, the kind of thing that doesn't forgive. Sometimes I imagine the moment when two different kinds of criminal worlds meet. The white-collar men who move money and the men who collect favors in dark rooms. They sign unseen contracts. They trade in escalation. Julia's phone call suggested I'd pried open something with a long snake attached. The next days became about containment. I hardened my devices. I moved cash into accounts that mattered. I kept my movements public, never private. And all the while, Detective Marquez's report was like a slow pressure valve. She was methodical, and methodical people leave fingerprints too. The hardest part, though, was the quiet. Nights spent replaying the exact moment I first saw them at the Parkline Hotel, The way her shoulder fit against him. The way I'd negotiated my silence into a weapon. The moral math became a sequence of small bankruptcies, little lies, small betrayals, collateral casualties. I am starting to understand now that ruin is rarely neat. It spreads. It touches desks and dinner tables and the futures of small people. The ledger never balances the way you think it will. You light matches to see the truth and you discover you've burned the map. F Part 3 taught me the method. Part 4 is teaching me the cost. The stakes feel higher now. The watchers are watching me back. The systems I use to exploit have teeth that can bite through justice and morals alike. There is one thing I have left that they cannot take without confronting me face to face. The truth. Filed and duplicated. The same evidence that started this whole avalanche. It sits in 3 encrypted locations, under passphrases that mean nothing to anyone but me. I can destroy it. I can release it. Either choice will set a new chain in motion. Detective Marquez called yesterday and asked for a follow-up interview. She wants clarification on some timelines. Her voice was neutral. Her eyes, I know from everything I've learned, will be precise. I could answer her honestly. I could confess, open the ledger, and let law decide. Or I could keep guarding the map I made because once you open it, you also open yourself. There's a last calculation I've been writing in the margins of my sleep. Whether the life I want back is even the one I had before. Because even if I stop, someone else will light another match. The system keeps reproducing its predators. I'm out of neat endings. All I have left are choices that will make new wreckage. The final chapter, when it comes, will ask whether I want justice, revenge, or survival. I can feel the choice settling like a weight in my chest. And Detective Marquez. She wants answers. So do I. Detective Lila Marquez's office smelled like coffee and old files. It should have been comforting, procedural, efficient, but she had the kind of calm that made you feel like a defendant even when you were there to help. She slid a thick manila envelope across the table and didn't look at me while she spoke. I don't care about your marriage, Mr. Blake, she said plainly. I care about the ledger. I care about whether crimes happened, who benefited, and how many people were hurt. I also care about whether a private citizen took the law into his own hands. Her eyes met mine then, steady as steel. You did what you thought was right. That's not why you're here. You're here because someone complained that evidence was tampered with, and because a major transfer trail has been altered in ways that make prosecution difficult. I felt the floor tilt, not from surprise, but from the inevitability I'd been dodging. So, what now? I asked. You give us the raw files, he said. Everything you collected, unedited, unredacted. We'll verify, we'll cross-reference, we'll put protection where it's needed. We'll build a case that can survive the appeals and the moneyed lawyers. She paused. In return, we'll recommend leniency for you if your intent was to uncover a larger scheme rather than to commit fraud to hide your tracks. Leniency. The word tasted like a bargain, not a salvation. I forged documents, I said before I could stop myself. The confession fell out like a stone into water. Small, loud ripples. Her jaw didn't move. That complicates things. I planted evidence to nudge the auditors. I said, I set up honeypot Wi-Fi to capture sessions. I manufactured an email thread to redirect suspicion. I leaked things anonymously. I wanted them to feel the panic I felt. I wanted them to break in public so there was no private cover-up. I watched the expression on her face, hoping for shock, for disgust, for anything that felt like absolution. She folded her fingers under her chin. You did a lot, she said. You also put innocents at risk. People who weren't part of the embezzlement were dragged into investigations. You used the system's vulnerabilities like a hammer. She looked tired in a way that meant she'd seen this story before, dressed with different names. We sat in the quiet for a full minute. Outside, traffic murmured. I thought about the junior analyst, the vendor's wife, the man who'd been reassigned. I thought about Julia's face the night she left, the way fear had made her hands small. I thought about the photographs in the encrypted folders, and how close I'd come to burning everything to the internet in a single, vengeful night. If I hand over everything, I said, what do you do with Julia? With Victor? With the people higher up? The question was practical and childish at once. I wanted a tidy finish. Lila's lips twitched like she was choosing words from a drawer. We follow the trace to its end. If it leads to larger actors, we bring them in. If it's limited, a CFO and a complicit admin, we prosecute accordingly. We'll need cooperation. You'll need to be honest about how you gathered the evidence. We can protect you from the worst consequences, but you'll have to accept responsibility for the things you did that crossed legal lines. Responsibility. The word took its toll. For months I'd avoided it like a burglar avoiding light. Now it sat in the room with us, a patient thing waiting for a signature. I left her office with a secure thumb drive in my pocket, one of 3. The others sat encrypted on servers I trusted less and loved more. On the walk back to the car, I imagined 2 futures, one where I turned the drive over and the system chewed through criminals and my reputation in equal measure, another where I made the files public, an act of guerrilla justice that would burn the house and the garden, the innocent along with the architects. It's strange how quickly fantasy helps justify sin. I pictured Victor on the stand, a man who had thought himself invulnerable, humiliated in front of shareholders. I pictured the vendors paid back. I pictured Julia small and contrite, perhaps forgiven in a quiet, bureaucratic way that doesn't look good in tabloids, but saves lives. And beneath it all, the part of me that had wanted to punish seeing victims actually recompensed. But there was another part of me, the part that woke at 3 a.m., counting possible knock-dash-ons. What if the evidence vanished in appeals? What if Victor's partners paid their way out? What if law created room for people with money to slither into loopholes? I had seen systems bend for men with influence. The idea of handing the keys to that same system felt like trusting an arsonist with a bucket. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the living room floor with the mug of coffee gone cold beside me, the city pressed against the windows like a curious crowd. I thought of the posture I'd assumed at the start. Calm, procedural, an operator of facts. I had become someone else in the process, a man who had weaponized truth. At dawn, I made the call. I unplugged the drive and sat beneath the pale light. I thought about the junior analyst's pleading voice and the vendor's small family, and I opened the first folder. What I handed over to Detective Marquez was not a cleaned-up dossier for theatrics. It was messy. It was honest. It included everything that would implicate Victor and the offshore chain, but also the misleading files I'd created, the honeypot logs, the fake threads. I signed a statement acknowledging my interventions, my forgeries, my motives. It felt like stepping into winter naked. The prosecutor did what prosecutors do. She built a narrative out of shreds. She put the clean traces up front: bank transfers, shell companies, emails tracing back to corporate accounts Victor controlled. She used my files as starting points. She put in protective motions for the junior analyst, negotiated immunity for the vendor in exchange for testimony, and subpoenaed records I had no way of seeing from my living room. She asked me to give honest testimony about my methods, which meant confessing every deception I'd used to make the case move. The hearings were quiet at first, procedural and antiseptic. Then, like any pressure system with a release valve, they built steam. Investigations widened. A small firm in Jersey got called for records. A trustee in Jersey revealed an account that showed a familiar routing number. Victor's phone records placed him in meetings at times he had denied. People I'd never heard of were named in depositions. The web I'd only guessed at began to show an outline, and then the slow, terrible, beautiful part of justice happened. Arrests, not grandiose raids on skyscrapers. The quiet sort: subpoenas, men led out in handcuffs from their corporate offices to waiting cars. Men who'd once guided policy meetings with polished curiosity now wore orange jumpsuits and remembered birthdays badly. Haltingly, the system chewed at its own. There were costs. My admission of forgery forced the prosecutor to negotiate. The defense argued that since I had created false threads, evidence could be unreliable. The trial for the CFO avoided the worst charges because clever defense counsel planted doubt about some items. Some of the bigger fish swam free on procedural technicalities. It was maddeningly familiar. Justice is as much about procedure as it is about truth. But there were convictions, two, one for embezzlement, two for money laundering, and a string of lesser settlements. The vendor got restitution. The junior analyst was reinstated in a different role with back pay. Some small returns were made. Not everything balanced, not even close, and Julia, she came back into my life with a small cardboard box and clean eyes. Her cooperation had been partial enough to keep her out of jail, but not clean enough to be innocent in the court of public opinion. She looked older, not because the calendar had changed, but because consequences had carved new lines into her face. We met in a coffee shop far from the river, where strangers could be strangers. "Why did you do it?" she asked first, voice careful. I could see the edge in her, the part of her that still expected performance. "Because I thought you were my anchor," I said. "Because I thought you were safe. Because I let my certainties make me blind." The truth sounded smaller spoken aloud. She looked at me long enough that I thought she might leave. "Instead," she said, "I never wanted you to get hurt. But I wanted freedom more than I wanted us." It was simple. It was cruel. It was also the most honest thing she had given me. We didn't reconcile. We didn't even make plans for polite civility. We treated facts like two people closing a ledger. She told me who'd been higher up than Victor, names that surprised and names that didn't. She spoke of pressure from men who didn't ask for loyalty so much as demand silence. I listened. I already knew much of what she said, but hearing it from her made it official. Months later, Victor got a 5-year sentence, reduced, as expected. The larger architects slipped into consulting, their faces less recognizable but their influence intact in new corporate forms. The vendor's daughter sent me a letter. The junior analyst sent a photo of his baby. Those things mattered. They were small recompenses in an awful economy. As for me, the prosecutor recommended deferred prosecution and community service, on the condition that I stay out of any private investigations and cooperate fully with ongoing inquiries. The recommendation passed with caveats. I paid a fine. I testified. I accepted the cost of my methods. It was enough to keep me out of prison. Not everyone gets that. Not everyone deserves it. But luck plays a role in justice. In the quiet after, I found the thing I'd been chasing wasn't even the exposure of crime. It was the retrieval of myself, the painful and patient work of unmaking a man who'd believed the world could be fixed by a ledger and a weighty hand. What I did gained me a kind of clarity. It also lost me a lot. Friends left, clients wavered, and the city no longer looked like a place where a man could settle. I moved. I taught a small class on security ethics at a community college. I tried to show others the place where curiosity becomes cruelty, where surveillance tips into obsession. I tried to teach restraint, because I still believed it mattered. Sometimes, at night, I wonder if I made the right choice handing the files to Leela. Would exposing everything publicly have forced faster, harsher change? Or would it have burned the innocents with the guilty? I don't know. I know only that I chose a procedure that let law do its work imperfectly, because I believed, perhaps foolishly, the state was the lesser of two evils. Julia called once, months after everything subsided, and said she'd found steady work in a small firm that didn't ask her to justify past sins. "I'm trying," she said. "I'm trying to be someone I can live with." The sentence sounded like a prayer. I wanted to hope for her. I wanted to hope for myself. The ledger I built is gone from my drives, now archived with the prosecutor, accessible only by subpoena. I keep a copy of the statement I wrote in a cardboard box with less reverence than I used to give to things that mattered. Sometimes I take it out and read my confessions like a map of the man I no longer want to be. There is no neat redemption in this. There is only consequence and the small, hard work of living with it. I paid for my methods. They paid for theirs. Some people were whole. Some people were not. The world kept turning, with men in suits learning to be quieter about the ways they eat. New predators will always find the seams. That is the cruel recurrence of systems. In the end, I learned one brutal thing: revenge can make truth visible, but it will never make you whole. If anything, it teaches you that justice, however imperfect, requires patience, procedure, and restraint. Ugly words that taste like medicine. On a good morning, I wake up, and the river smells like rain, and something else, possibility maybe. On a bad one, I hear the phantom ring of a phone that's already gone. I still check the locks at night. Old habits don't die. They become caution. If you ask me whether I would do it again, the honest answer is that I might. But I would do one thing differently. I would hand the truth to the right people sooner. And I'd keep my hands cleaner. I can't go back and unmake what I did. I can only try to live with the cost and teach others how not to fall into the same dark mathematics. Sometimes Leela calls with an update, sometimes a thank you. Rarely, she asks how I sleep. I tell her the truth, fitfully. She tells me that's human. I take the sentiment and put it in a box with everything else. We are each architects of our own ruins if we let emotion be the only blueprint. I learned that lesson the expensive way. And when I pass the classroom window now and see a student glance up and look out at the river, I imagine telling him a version of this story, not to warn him off the pursuit of justice, but to teach him the price of carrying it in your hands like a weapon.